Hey guys, today we're going to continue working on our trig ratios of radian angles, and we're going to throw in a little twist to it using the reciprocal trig ratios. But let's go ahead and do a couple of examples here of the ones that we've been working on. So we have this here, right? We have the cosine of this radian, negative 13 pi over 6. And we said that in order to do this one, we don't want to deal with negative angles or radians. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this into a positive within one rotation of the unit circle. Well, so how do you do that? Well, first start off with this. How many times does 6 go into 13? And you're going to say, well, 2, right? Okay, well, 6 times 2 is 12. Negative 13 plus 12, that's going to give me negative 1. Well, and I don't want a negative, so I'm going to use 3. Okay, so what I'm going to do, okay, you're going to go ahead and negative 13 pi over 6. We're going to add because we want to make it positive. Okay. We're going to use 3, right? 3 times 6 is 18. So we're going to use 18 pi over 6. All right. Negative 13 plus 18 is positive 5 pi over 6. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find cosine of 5 pi over 6. So negative 13 pi over 6 is the exact same thing as 5 pi over 6. So what did I do? How many times does 6 go into 13? We said 2. But if we do 2, it's still going to give us a negative angle. So we did one more. We did 3. Okay. So now we have 5 pi over 6. So now we're going to look at the reference angle. We're going to look at this guy. Okay, so pi over 6. Okay, cosine is the top. Pi over 6 is 30 degrees right here. Pi over 6. Cosine is the top. So 3 fingers. So the answer is square root of 3 over 2. The only difference is now, is it a positive or is it a negative? And that's where we have to figure out, where does 5 pi over 6 lie? So we know pi over 6 is in the first quadrant. If you take 6, take away 1, that's going to give you 5. And when you subtract, remember, when you subtract 6 minus 1, it's on the left side, on the second quadrant. So we know that 5 pi over 6 is located in the second quadrant. So all sin tacos. And you can see that sine is on the second quadrant. So what does that mean? That means in this quadrant, only the sine is positive. That is not sine, that is cosine. So that automatically, that means it's negative. Okay. And it makes sense because cosine, right, you go left, right, going backwards is negative. Remember, cosine represents the x coordinate, sine represents the y coordinate. Let's do the next one. How many times does 4 go into 15? Well, we'll say about 3, right? If we do 4, that's too much. 4 times 4 is 16. And if I bring it back, if I take away, that's going to give me a negative angle. So we're going to use 3. We want to get as close to the 15 as possible without going over. So we're going to use 3, okay? So what we're going to do, this is a positive angle, okay? So 15 pi over 4, that means it went around 3 times. So we're going to bring it back by 3 pi, okay? What about this guy? You see how this guy's negative? What did we do? We added 3 pi, all right? But in this case, we're going to subtract 3 pi because it's a positive, so we want to bring it back. So 4 times 3 is 12. So we have 15 pi over 4 minus 12 pi over 4. And then 15 minus 12 is 3. Okay. And hopefully that makes sense now why we use 3. Because if we would have used 4, we would have had 4 times 4 is 16. Okay. And that would have been 15 minus 16, which would have been a negative. Okay. So now we have tangent of 3 pi over 4. Okay. So now we're going to do that one. So pi over 4 is here. Now we're going to use pi over 4 is this guy right here. Okay, which one's pi over 4? Tangent. Well, tangent is sine over cosine. So sine is this guy over this guy. So square root of 2 divided by square root of 2, which is a 1. So technically what you're doing is square root of 2 over 2 divided by square root of 2 over 2, which is a 1. But we got to figure out where's 3 pi over 4. Okay, because is that a positive one or is that a negative one? So pi over 4 is over here. Okay, where's 3 pi over 4? So 4 take away 1 is 3. So over here. 3 pi over 4. So again, all sin tacos. The second quadrant, only sine is positive. That means everything else is negative. So the answer here is -1. Okay. Now let's throw in a little wrench into it. See, now we have cotangent. Now we're dealing with reciprocal trig ratios. So what you're going to do first is, you're going to do the reciprocal. We know tangent is the reciprocal of cotangent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first figure out tangent of -13 pi over 6. Get my answer, and at the final result, you're going to reciprocal. We're going to flip it. Why? Because that's a reciprocal trig ratio. So same thing. You see how it's a negative angle? We're going to add to bring it back. So how many times does 6 go into 13? You said 2, right? But we want to make it positive, so we're going to do 3. So -13 pi over 6. Okay. And then we're going to add because we want to make it positive. And then we're going to do 3. Okay. Because if you do 2, then 6 times 2 is 12. You're still going to get a negative pi, and we don't want to deal with negative angles. But 6 times 3 is 18. So we're going to have -13 pi plus 18 pi over 6. That's going to give me 5 pi over 6. Okay. So now we continue. We're going to go ahead and do tangent of 5 pi over 6. Okay. And now we can solve it. So now I'm going to go ahead and look at pi over 6. Pi over 6 is 30 degrees. Is this guy right here. Tangent, right, is sine over cosine. So square root of 1 over square root of 3. So square root of 1 over square root of 3. Right? Well, the square root of 1 is pretty simple. That's just 1. And then we get radical 3. Okay. I'm not going to do anything with it yet because I know at the very end I have to do what? Flip it. So now I got to figure out, is it positive or is it a negative? All right. So I know pi over 6 is 30 degrees. That one's right here. Where is 5 pi over 6? 6 take away 1 is over here. And looks like they're all coming out in the second quadrant, and that's okay. So all sin tacos. So right here, the second quadrant, only sine is positive. That's not sine. That's tangent. So automatically this is negative. So we figured out the tangent of 5 pi over 6 is -1 over root 3. Good, but that's not what they're asking for. They're asking for what? Cotangent. So what am I going to do? I'm going to flip this guy. So the answer is actually going to become, whoops, sorry about that. The answer is going to become square root of 3 over 1 with a negative. Or more precisely, the negative square root of 3. Okay. So that's what you're doing, guys. You're finding the trig ratio, and then at the very end, you're flipping it. So let's do secant of pi over 2. All right, well, secant of pi over 2, secant is the reciprocal of cosine, cosine pi over 2. All right, so now I got to figure that one out, and when I do it, then I flip it, or do the reciprocal. Now, hopefully you can see that pi over 2 is, you can't use your hand with it, but you're going to use your corner points. Pi over 2 is right over here. Okay, what's the coordinate right there? Well, that is 0, 1. What's cosine? It's right there. Cosine is 0. The answer is 0. Okay, well, that's not what they're asking for, right? They're not asking for cosine. They're asking for secant. So what do? You flip it. Well, how do you flip a 0? Well, just imagine that there's a 1 underneath. So then what does that become? That becomes 1 over 0. Can you divide by 0? No, you cannot. So what's the answer? It's undefined because you can't divide by 0. All right, guys? Let's try another one. See a few more. The more we do these, the more you get comfortable with them. All right. Same thing here. Cosecant of 23 pi over 4. Cosecant is the reciprocal trig ratio of sine. So we have sine of 23 pi over 4. And then I'll go ahead and flip it. All right. How many times is 4 going to 23? We want to bring it back because this is too big. Well, let's see. That'll be what? 5. Yeah, if I do 5, I'll get close to it. If I do 6, that'll be too much. So 4 times 5. So let's do 23 pi over 4. Okay, we're going to bring it back. So we're going to subtract. We're going to subtract 5. Okay. 4 times 5 is 20. So 23 pi over 4 minus 20 pi over 4. Well, 23 minus 20 is 3 pi over 4. So now I'm going to find sine of 3 pi over 4. All right, good. So now what do? I look at my reference angle. I look at this guy, pi over 4. Where's pi over 4? Right in the middle. Bend that finger. Sine is the bottom. Square root of 2 over 2. So this guy is going to be square root of 2 over 2. But is it positive or is it negative? We don't know. So pi over 4 is located here in the first quadrant. Where is 3 pi over 4? 4 take away 1 is 3. 3 pi over 4. It's in the second quadrant again. And sorry, I didn't mean to make them all in the second quadrant. All sin tacos. Sine is positive. Oh, is that sine? Yes, it is. So that means this guy is what? It's positive. What do you do now? That's not our answer. Remember, we want cosecant. So what do you got to do with this guy? You have to flip it. So we're going to come over here. And this guy's going to become 2 over square root of 2. But your professor's not going to allow you to leave it like that. You're going to have to rationalize it. So you're going to go ahead and multiply it by square root of 2. Oops, square root of 2. And so 2 times square root of 2, that's going to give you 2 radical 2. Square root of 2 times square root of 2 is square root of 4. And the square root of 4 is 2. So you're going to have 2 radical 2 over 2. These guys are going to simplify out. So your final answer is square root of 2. Right there. That's your answer. Okay. Let's do another one. Secant. Secant. Reciprocal trig ratio of cosine. Cosine of negative 19 pi over 6. How many times does 6 go into 19? Well, was that 3 times? Remember, we're going to add it. We want to make it into a positive. If I only do 3, okay. Let's say I do 3. 6 times 3, that's 18. Negative 19 plus 18, that's negative 1. I don't want to deal with negative angles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one more. I'm going to use 4. Okay. So negative 19 pi over 6. And then we're going to add 6 times 4 is 24. 24 pi over 6. And negative 19 plus 24 is 5 pi over 6. So now we're going to find the cosine of 5 pi over 6. Same thing now. We're going to look at our reference angle, which is pi over 6. Pi over 6 is 30 degrees, which is this guy folded. Where is cosine? Cosine is the top. 1, 2, 3. So the answer is root 3 over 2. I just got to figure out, is it a positive or is it a negative? Okay, cool. So pi over 6 is 30 degrees. It's over here. All right. Where's 5 pi over 6? 6 take away 1. Again, it's in the second quadrant. I'm sorry. All sin tacos. Second quadrant, sine is only positive. Is that sine? No, it's not. It's cosine. So that means it's going to be negative. But is that my final answer? No, it's not. Why? Because they don't want cosine. They want what? Secant, the reciprocal. So you're going to flip this guy. So we're going to come over here. and you're going to flip it. So it's going to be 2 over square root of 3. Let's keep the negative on the top. Okay. So now what do? Well, you have to rationalize it. So multiply by radical 3. Multiply by radical 3. And then you get negative 2 times radical 3 is negative 2 radical 3. Square root of 3 times square root of 3 is square root of 9. So we finalize it, negative 2 radical 3, the square root of 9 is 3. And that's your final answer, guys, right here. All right. Number 7. Let's go ahead and do cosecant. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So we have sine of 7 pi over 3. All right. Let's see. How many times is 7? There's 3 going to 7. We're going to bring it back because it's a positive, right? 7 pi over 3 minus, what was it, 2? Yeah, 2. That's as close as we can get. 3 times 2 is 6. So 7 pi over 3 minus 6 pi over 3. That's going to give me 1 pi over 3. Cool. So now I just got to figure out what is the sine of pi over 3. And pi over 3 is my reference angle. So pi over 3 is 60 degrees. Pi over 3, what's the sine of it? Sine is the bottom, 1, 2, 3. Square root of 3 over 2. Now where's pi over 3 located? Well, of course it's in the first quadrant. And in the first quadrant, they are all positive. The problem is, that's not your answer, right? They want cosecant. So what do? You got to flip this guy, the reciprocal. So that becomes 2 over radical 3. And of course, you have to rationalize it. Your professor won't allow you to leave it that way. Square root of 3, square root of 3. And that's going to give you 2 radical 3. Same thing, square root of 3 times square root of 3 is square root of 9. And the square root of 9 is 3. So your final answer is 2 radical 3 over 3. There it is. So hopefully it's starting to make a little bit more sense. Let's do cotangent. Cotangent, the reciprocal trig ratio of tangent. Okay, and then you start thinking, okay, well, how many times is 3 going to 14? 3 goes into 14, that's a positive angle, so we're going to go ahead and bring it back. We're going to subtract. So let's see what, 4, 5. If I do 5, that's going to be 15. 14 minus 15, that gives me a negative. So I'm going to do 4. So 3 times 4 is 12. So we're going to get 14 pi over 3 minus 12 pi over 3. 14 minus 12 is 2. So we're going to have 2 pi over 3. So now we have tangent of 2 pi over 3. Cool. Now, 2 pi over 3. Look at your reference angle, which is this guy here. Pi over 3 is 60 degrees right here. Boom. What's the definition of tangent? Tangent is sine over cosine. So square root of 3 over square root of 1. So you get square root of 3 over square root of 1. The square root of 1 is simple. That's just 1. So we're left with square root of 3. Well, now I got to figure out, is it a positive or is it a negative? Well, where's pi over 3? Pi over 3 is right up here. Where is 2 pi over 3? 3 take away 1 would be in the second quadrant. 2 pi over 3. All sin da cos. All right, well, over here it's positive. Sine is the only one that's positive, but that's not sine, that's tangent. So that guy is going to be negative. Is that what I wanted? No. Remember, what do they want? They want cotangent. So you're going to have to flip this guy. Remember, there's a invisible 1 right there, so we're going to flip it. So over here, you're going to end up with 1 over radical 3. Leave that negative on the top. And of course, you're going to have to rationalize it. Radical 3 on the top and the bottom. You're going to get negative radical 3 over square root of 3 times square root of 3 is square root of 9. Square root of 9 is positive 3. And that's your answer. All right, guys. Let's see if we can do 2 more. Just to make sure you guys get in the hang of it. Cosecant. We'll do sine. Remember, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So negative 11 pi over 6. Now it's a negative, right? So that means we're going to be adding. Okay, we're going to be adding. How much are we going to be adding? Well, how many times is 6 going to 11? Only once, but because I want to make it positive, I'm going to use 2. Okay, 6 times 2 is 12. So now negative 11 pi over 6 plus 12 pi over 6. That's going to give me 1 pi over 6 positive, which is nice. That's what I want. I want these positive angles or radians. Cool. Now I got to figure out what's sine pi over 6. Well, pi over 6 is 30 degrees right here. Cool. Where's sine? The bottom. So that's 1 finger. So the answer is 1/2. And remember, pi over 6 is in the first quadrant, so they're all positive. So that means that guy's a positive. Is that what I wanted? No, that's not. What do they want? Cosecant. So I have to do what? Flip it. So you come over here and you flip it. So you're going to get 2 over 1. And your final answer is actually 2. Okay. Last one is cotangent of 7 pi. That's going to be the same thing as tangent of 7 pi. So I got to figure out where that guy's at. Okay, that one's kind of weird, isn't it? Okay. Now, a couple of ways you can do this. You can do the same process here. Like, how many times does 1 go into 7? Would be 7, right? I guess you can do it that way. Put a 1 on the right. How many times does 1 go into 7? Well, 7. So we're going to subtract, right? We're going to bring it back. But if I subtract 7, that's just going to give me 0 pi. That doesn't make any sense. So we're going to do 1 before. We're going to do 6. And that's going to give me pi. So we're going to actually find tangent of pi. Okay, now let me draw it out here so you guys can take a look at it. This is 0 degrees, and this is pi. And then if you keep going now, this is 2 pi. So think about it. It opens this way, right? So that's 1 pi, 2 pi, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pi. There it is. 7 pi is right there. That's another way you could have done it. Now, what are the coordinates here? Well, that's negative 1, comma 0. Okay, remember, what is tangent? Sine divided by cosine. Sine divided by cosine, which is y over the x, which would be 0 over 1. Or actually negative 1. Well, 0 divided by negative 1. Good. But is that what they wanted? No. They want cotangent. So I got to flip this guy. Reciprocal. So that means I'm going to come here, and it's going to be negative 1 over 0. Can we divide by 0? The answer is no. The answer is undefined. Why? Because you're dividing by 0. Alright guys, so hopefully that made some sense. Start getting the pattern of it and using your trig ratios, and let me know and give you more examples. Thank you.